Volcanoes are among nature's most awe-inspiring forces. When they erupt, they don't just spew lava, they unleash chaos, heat, and toxic gases capable of wiping out entire towns within moments. These aren't just natural disasters, they're human tragedies frozen in time, where ordinary people faced unimaginable horror. In this video, we explore 5 of the most disturbing volcano-related deaths ever recorded that reveal just how helpless even the strongest among us can be when the Earth itself decides to erupt in fury. On January 17, 2002, the earth beneath Goma began to shudder a low, thunderous growl that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. Within minutes, Mount Nyiragongo had erupted, sending a blazing torrent of molten rock tearing down its slopes toward the city. The people of Goma didn't have hours to react, they had minutes. Streets turned into glowing rivers of fire moving faster than cars could drive, swallowing homes, markets, and entire neighborhoods in a matter of moments. The air filled with a choking mix of ash and burning gas, and the sky turned a haunting shade of red as the ground literally melted beneath fleeing residents. Mount Nyiragongo wasn't just erupting, it was chasing them. The lava, unlike most in the world, was incredibly fluid, flowing as fast as 60 kilometers per hour. It sliced the city in two, igniting fuel stations, trapping families inside collapsing buildings, and leaving behind nothing but smoldering ruins. Around 250 people lost their lives that day. Some burned where they stood, others suffocated under the heavy blanket of toxic fumes that spread as the lava met the air. Survivors described hearing the hiss of molten rock approaching long before they saw it, a horrifying sound that grew louder until everything around them was devoured by fire. But what made this eruption so horrifying wasn't just the destruction, it was its intimacy. Goma wasn't a distant village on the slopes of a mountain, it was a city of nearly 500,000 people, a place filled with children walking to school and parents cooking breakfast when the world turned to fire. By nightfall, nearly 120,000 people were left homeless. Entire families camped on the streets or fled barefoot across the border into Rwanda, carrying what little they could as the ground trembled beneath them. Streets that once carried laughter and life were reduced to blackened wastelands, carved through by molten scars still hissing with heat. From above, NASA satellites captured surreal red ribbons glowing through the city, not lights, but liquid fire, weaving their way toward Lake Kivu. Scientists feared something even worse, that the lava could disturb the lake's gas-rich depths and release a deadly cloud of carbon dioxide and methane, like the one that suffocated entire villages at Lake Nyos in Cameroon years earlier. Thankfully, that second disaster never came, but the terror it inspired has never truly left. In the weeks that followed, hundreds of aftershocks rattled the region, toppling already weakened buildings and sending waves of panic through displaced survivors. Aid workers described Goma as a city built on a wound that never stopped bleeding. Mount Nyiragongo remains one of the most dangerous volcanoes on Earth. Its lava lake still bubbles deep within, and every tremor is a reminder that beneath Goma's fragile calm lies a sleeping giant capable of turning life to ash in seconds. For the people who survived 2002, it wasn't just an eruption. It was a vision of the apocalypse, a night when the Earth itself opened up and swallowed their world whole.
In May of 2016, thru-hiker Ian Crombie was stumbling through the snow in northern New Mexico on the Continental Divide Trail, or CDT for short.
It was November 14, 2015, when 59-year-old Stephen Otter Olansky, known simply as Otter in the hiking community, began what would tragically become his final journey. A highly skilled outdoorsman, Otter had already earned the coveted Triple Crown of hiking, completing the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail. That day, he set out for his 5th trek along the Continental Divide Trail, planning to cover 75 miles south from Cumbres Pass near the New Mexico-Colorado border to Ghost Ranch, New Mexico. Armed with 2 weeks of supplies, a red and gray tent and winter gear, he believed his experience would carry him through. But nature had other plans. From the very beginning, the conditions were brutal. Deep snow blanketed the trail. Temperatures hovered well below freezing, and the mid-November landscape offered no mercy. Otter had stayed in Chema, New Mexico to prepare, reassuring his friend Ben Whitting that he would check in after 10 days, and if not, Ben should alert authorities. Confidence in his skill overshadowed the growing danger, but the moment he stepped onto the trail, the weight of the environment became clear. The snow was far deeper than he had anticipated. Each step was a struggle, each mile an exhausting battle. His journal reveals a man battling not only the elements but the creeping fear of miscalculation. Weakness set in. Fatigue became relentless, and at one point he attempted to turn back, managing only a single mile before collapsing. Trapped, isolated, and at the mercy of the wilderness, Otter had no choice but to return to his campsite, hoping to endure. Days turned into weeks. Frostbite began to claim him. Hunger gnawed at his strength, and the harsh winter refused to relent. In his journal and video messages, he admitted the stark reality. He had made a terrible mistake. One entry is particularly haunting, where he acknowledges that he should never have ventured out in such conditions, expressing hope that Ben would follow through and alert authorities. But by the time Ben did, on November 29th, more than 2 weeks had passed, and the situation had already slipped beyond rescue. Search and rescue teams launched a desperate hunt, but the wilderness had swallowed Otter whole. His phone battery was dead, eliminating any chance of locating him quickly. Resourceful as ever, he left signals. A large help sign in the snow, a fire set in a wooden shelter at Laguna's campground, and even makeshift skis crafted from metal to navigate the unforgiving terrain. Yet every effort was in vain. The cold, the isolation, and starvation conspired against him. By February 2016, Otter's body had succumbed to the merciless elements. He passed away alone in the wilderness he loved, his life claimed not by lack of skill or determination, but by the unforgiving power of nature itself. It wasn't until April 7th, 2016, that a fellow hiker, Ian Cromie, discovered him at Lagunita Campground. Cromie's eyes fell upon a chilling message scratched into the restroom door. Dead CDT hiker inside. Call cops. Near his body, a note confirmed Otter's identity and implored authorities to act immediately. Recovered journals painted a heartbreaking portrait of his final days. Otter reflected on his choices with clarity, taking full responsibility, expressing regret, and even offering thanks to his friends. He had faced the wilderness with courage, skill, and ingenuity. But sometimes even the most prepared and experienced adventurers cannot overcome the raw brutality of winter.
All of a sudden I saw a patch of white that wasn't rock and it wasn't snow. And all of a sudden, I'm going to go look over here. And as I started traversing closer to this, I saw what appeared to be the lower part of a leg, and it was a heel.
For nearly a century, one of mountaineering's greatest mysteries remained unsolved. What truly happened to Andrew Sandy Irvine and George Mallory on that fateful day in 1924? The two British climbers vanished into the clouds high on Everest's northeast ridge, chasing the dream of being the first to stand atop the world's highest peak. Did they reach the summit, or did the mountain claim them before they could etch their names into history? Mallory's body was discovered in 1999, frozen in time at 855 meters, 26 out of 155 feet. His skin ghostly white after decades in the ice. Irvine, the younger and lesser-known partner, remained missing, leaving a void that fueled speculation, theories, and endless searches. Many believed he held the missing camera that could prove whether they had summited before perishing. Others assumed he was buried deep beneath Everest's icy grip, never to be found. Then, in October 2024, a discovery shook the mountaineering world. A National Geographic team, including filmmaker and climber Jimmy Chin, was exploring the frozen expanse of the central Rongbuk Glacier when something caught their eyes. A single, weathered boot. Its cracked leather clung to the sole, steel hobnails glinting faintly in the sun. The team knew instantly they had stumbled upon something extraordinary. As they drew closer, the truth became undeniable. Inside the boot was a foot, frozen, lifeless, preserved by Everest's merciless cold. I lifted up the sock, Chin recalled, voice trembling, and there's a red label with A.C. Irvine stitched into it. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then chaos erupted. The team shouted, ran in circles, hearts racing. They had just uncovered the remains of a man lost to history for 100 years. Irvine had finally been found. The implications were staggering. For decades, climbers and historians debated what happened to Mallory and Irvine. Had they reached the summit before their deaths? Had Irvine, carrying the camera that could hold the truth, been lost in the shifting ice all these years? Now, at last, there was an answer, at least part of one. The discovery brought bittersweet closure for Irvine's family. His great-niece, Julie Summers, who had spent years piecing together his story, felt the weight of finality settle over her. "It's an object that belonged to him and has a bit of him in it," she said of the boot. "It tells the story about what probably happened." Summers believes Irvine's body was carried down by avalanches, trapped beneath the glacier's slow, relentless movement. DNA testing will confirm the remains' identity, but the message is already clear. After a century of silence, Everest has begun to yield its secrets. Yet one question still lingers in the frigid air. Did they reach the summit? Or does Everest still guard the final, elusive piece of the puzzle?
This is the moment a sunny Saturday morning on Mount Ontake suddenly turned deadly.
It was a crisp autumn morning in Japan. The sky above the Mount Ontake was a perfect blue, the air cool and clear. Hundreds of people were scattered across the trails, snapping photos, chatting, and admiring the fiery fall colors that painted the slopes. There was no sense of danger, no tremors, no warning signs from the earth beneath their feet. But at 11:52 a.m., without the slightest hint of mercy, the mountain exploded. A violent roar shattered the calm. In an instant, a massive cloud of ash and steam burst from the summit, shooting thousands of feet into the air. Hikers who had been smiling seconds earlier were suddenly blinded by darkness as the sky turned gray and the ground shook beneath them. It wasn't lava that came for them. It was something far more terrifying. A Fredic eruption, where superheated water underground turns into explosive steam, launching ash, rocks, and toxic gas at incredible speed. People screamed and ran, but there was nowhere to go. Within seconds, the slopes of Mount Ontake became a battlefield of fire and stone. Rocks the size of basketballs rained from the sky, smashing into hikers' helmets and tearing through their backpacks. Ash poured down like snow, choking the air and coating everything in a suffocating gray. Visibility dropped to zero. Those near the summit were hit first. The heat, the gas, and the flying debris left them with no chance to escape. Videos recovered from the scene later showed the sheer panic hikers huddled under shelters, clutching their faces as the ash storm roared past. The sound was deafening, like a jet engine mixed with thunder. Within minutes, the landscape was unrecognizable. What had been a peaceful trail turned into a graveyard of twisted trees and ash-covered bodies. Rescue teams tried desperately to reach survivors, but the eruption had made the mountain too dangerous. Helicopters hovered above, barely able to see through the thick smoke and toxic gases. Those who managed to descend were burned, battered, and in shock, their hair and clothes singed, their skin covered in blisters from the scalding heat. For many others, help would come too late. By nightfall, more than 30 people were missing. Search teams climbed through waist-deep ash, digging with bare hands, but they found only tragedy. One by one, bodies were discovered. Hikers who had tried to shield themselves behind rocks or inside small shelters, overcome by gas and heat. In total, 63 lives were lost, making it Japan's deadliest volcanic eruption in decades. Some were found holding on to friends or family, their final moments frozen in gray ash. The days that followed were marked by heartbreak and disbelief. Families gathered at the mountain's base, waiting for news that never came. Rescuers risked their lives again and again, climbing into deadly gas zones only to be forced back by fresh bursts of steam and falling debris. The grief soon turned to anger. Families of the victims demanded to know why no warning had been issued. Seismic readings had shown minor tremors before the eruption, but officials had deemed them insignificant. In 2017, Several families filed lawsuits against the Japanese government and Nagano Prefecture, arguing that the alert level should have been raised before the eruption. The authorities responded that the data had not suggested imminent danger, but for those who had lost loved ones, that explanation offered little comfort. It was October 5, 2022, when Daniel and Emma Heritage, a young Australian couple, set out on a rock climbing trip in Banff National Park, Canada. Married for 4 years, both shared an unshakable passion for climbing, spending months exploring the rugged peaks of the Canadian Rockies. That day, they aimed to conquer the Mother's Day Buttress, a challenging route on Cascade Mountain. The climb was difficult but well within their skill level, meant to be their last ascent of the season before bigger adventures awaited them. Daniel, 28, led the climb, moving with the precision of someone who had spent years mastering mountains. As he reached the 5th pitch, a steep corner crack far tougher than expected, he called down to Emma, who waited below at a secure spot. He reassured her, his voice steady, admitting it was harder than anticipated. Emma waited for the usual signal, Daniel's safe call, but the moment stretched into an uneasy silence. 10 minutes passed, then 15, and an uneasy feeling began to creep into her chest. Then she saw it. The rope connecting them had gone slack, a large section dropping toward her. Panic surged. She shouted, asking what was happening, but before she could react, Daniel appeared in her line of sight, tumbling uncontrollably down the mountainside. Rocks tore at him as he fell, bouncing across ledges, the sound of impact swallowed by the mountain's vast silence. Emma's heart froze as she watched, powerless, until he landed hard on a ledge just below her. Rushing to him, she found Daniel unconscious, blood trickling from his mouth, his helmet offering little protection against the brutal 20-meter fall. Instinct and love took over. She cradled his head in her lap, whispering words of love and comfort, tears streaming freely as she held him close, clinging to the hope that he might open his eyes. But Daniel's spirit slipped away quietly, leaving Emma surrounded by the mountains he cherished, holding the man she loved as he breathed his last. When rescuers arrived, they had to evacuate Emma first, leaving Daniel behind. The wrenching separation added another layer of pain. As the sole witness, she recounted every horrifying moment to authorities, each retelling, reopening the wound. The practical burdens followed. Travel insurance wouldn't cover accidental death, and bringing Daniel home to Australia would cost tens of thousands. Emma's twin sister, Jessica, launched a GoFundMe campaign, raising $40,800 of the $50,000 needed, while Daniel's mother contributed $112,000 to cover an initial deposit at a Canadian funeral home. Determined, Emma refused to leave him behind. In 2023, Emma returned to the Mother's Day Buttress, retracing the climb they had shared one last time. She wanted to understand how such an experienced climber could fall on a route they had both tackled with confidence. Standing above the spot where Daniel had fallen, she found no clear answers. Experts suggested he may have slipped or been caught off guard by a loose rock. It was noted he had not placed protective gear after the corner crack, perhaps assuming the terrain ahead was easier. Yet, no definitive cause could ever explain the tragedy. Daniel was remembered not just as a climber, but as a kind, adventurous, and loving man. Emma described him as her best friend, climbing partner, and the love of her life, someone who had shown her strength she didn't know she had.
The year was 1933, and Maurice Wilson was a man with a mission. Believing that he had a duty to impart to humanity his message of physical healing through spiritual meditation and fasting,
Maurice Wilson's story doesn't begin like a typical Everest tragedy. It unfolds like a blend of blind faith, wartime trauma, and a reckless dream that spiraled into one of the most bizarre deaths the mountain has ever seen. Born into comfort in Bradford, Wilson should have inherited his family's wool business, but the First World War changed everything. At just 18, he went to France, fought on the front lines, and earned the Military Cross for standing alone against a German assault. When he returned home, he was broken, physically, mentally, and spiritually. For years, he wandered the world, seeking a peace that always eluded him, haunted by old wounds, and sinking deeper into a loneliness no wealth or travel could fix. Then, in 1932, something shifted. After a mysterious ritual of prayer and extreme fasting, taught, he claimed, by a healer no one else had ever met, Wilson believed he had been reborn. His sickness disappeared. His faith in God and in the power of fasting became absolute. He became convinced he had a divine mission. And that mission, in his mind, was Mount Everest. Wilson didn't just want to climb Everest. He believed reaching the summit would prove that his spiritual methods could heal the world. It didn't matter that he had never climbed a real mountain or barely knew how to fly. Undeterred, he bought a tiny de Havilland Moth airplane, named it Everest, and learned to fly with great difficulty. Even after crashing it during practice, even after the British Air Ministry banned him from flying, even after friends begged him to stop, his obsession never wavered. Against all odds, he pulled off the impossible, flying across continents, dodging authorities, bypassing fuel restrictions, and landing in India with just enough fuel to roll onto the strip. It was the first miracle of his doomed mission. When the authorities confiscated his plane, Wilson simply changed tactics. He slipped into Darjeeling, enlisted 3 Sherpas willing to help, disguised himself as a mute monk, and illegally entered Tibet on foot. By April 1934, he stood at the base of Everest, alone, untrained, carrying minimal equipment, and yet utterly convinced that God and fasting would carry him to the top. What followed reads like a mixture of courage, delusion, and heartbreaking naivety. Wilson stumbled across the Rongbuk Glacier with no glacier training, constantly losing his way. He found crampons but discarded them. He believed footprints from the previous year would still guide him. He believed the mountain would simply open a path. Each attempt pushed him closer to physical collapse. Snowblind, starving, limping from old wounds, he pressed on. The Sherpas begged him to turn back. He refused. In one of his final diary entries, he wrote, "This will be a last effort, and I feel successful." That unwavering conviction made his journey inspiring and ultimately fatal. On May 31st, 1934, he wrote his last entry. Off again, gorgeous day. What happened after that remains unknown. The Sherpas left when he didn't return. A year later, in 1935, an expedition discovered his body at the foot of the North Col, lying beside the shredded remains of his tent. He had died alone, likely from exhaustion or starvation, just yards from where help could have reached him. In late October 2010, Indonesia's Mount Merapi erupted with terrifying power, marking one of the deadliest volcanic disasters in modern history. At first, it started with low, distant rumbles that locals had grown used to hearing over the years, a familiar sound from one of the world's most active volcanoes. But this time was different. The earth began to tremble more violently. Animals fled down the slopes, and within hours, Merapi exploded with unimaginable force. A massive column of ash shot nearly 10 miles into the sky, and the once green mountainside turned into a roaring furnace of fire, smoke, and molten rock. Lava poured down the volcano's slopes, but what made this eruption truly terrifying were the pyroclastic flows of fast-moving clouds of gas, ash, and rock that raced downhill at over 700 degrees Celsius, moving faster than a car. Entire villages were obliterated in seconds. People who tried to flee were overtaken by waves of searing heat, their homes and fields reduced to ash. The roar of the volcano was deafening, echoing for miles as lightning flashed through the dark clouds of smoke above. More than 350 people were killed and hundreds more severely injured. Nearly 400,000 were forced to flee their homes, carrying what little they could as they ran through choking clouds of ash and debris. Hospitals overflowed with burn victims, and rescuers struggled to reach survivors through the thick, suffocating air. The eruption didn't happen all at once. It came in waves, with violent explosions continuing for weeks, each one worse than the last. Every night the sky glowed red as Merapi spewed fire, and every dawn revealed a new stretch of destruction. Among the dead was Mbah Marijan, a beloved 83-year-old known as the spiritual gatekeeper of Mount Merapi. For decades, he had performed traditional rituals to calm the volcano's spirit and protect the local people. When government officials ordered evacuations, he refused to leave his village, saying, "If I leave, who will look after Merapi?" His loyalty cost him his life. Rescuers found him later, kneeling in prayer, his body preserved in a layer of ash, a haunting image that came to symbolize both faith and fatal devotion. The aftermath was apocalyptic. Entire communities were buried beneath meters of volcanic ash. Crops were destroyed, rivers were clogged with debris, and roofs collapsed under the weight of falling dust. The city of Yogyakarta, 30 kilometers away, was blanketed in gray. The air smelled of sulfur and smoke, and the once lively towns near the mountain fell silent. Even months later, steam continued to rise from the blackened earth, a grim reminder of the mountain's fury. The 2010 eruption of Mount Merapi was the most powerful since 1872, and it changed the lives of everyone who lived in its shadow. It was not just a natural disaster, it was a confrontation between humanity and nature's raw, unstoppable power. Those who survived would never forget the sound of the mountain's rage, the rain of ash that turned day into night, and the sight of a fiery river swallowing the world they once knew. For Indonesia, Merapi was not just a volcano, it was a living reminder that the earth itself can awaken without warning and remind us how fragile life truly is.
This is the last known photo taken alive of the students from the Kuybyshev Aviation Institute during their 1973 skiing expedition through the Kola Peninsula.
It was late January 1973 when 10 students from the Kuybyshev Aviation Institute set out on what was meant to be an exhilarating ski expedition across the remote Kola Peninsula in northern Russia. Eager to escape the monotony of exams, the group planned to tackle a moderately challenging route, classified as Category 2. Among them were Michael Kuznetsov, a 24-year-old experienced ski leader, Valentin Zamanov, 23, the group's guide, Ilya Alcher, a cinematographer and recent graduate, 26-year-old engineer Lydia Martina, and several first-year students, Alexander Novas, Salov, Yuri Uskov, Artem Leant, Sergei Gusev, Yuri Kov, and Anatoly Perov. They left the village of Revda on January 25th, intending to reach Kov by January 31st. But just 2 days into the trek, disaster struck. As they ascended a pass in the icy Lero tundra above the Chiver River, all 10 students perished under circumstances that would forever remain shrouded in mystery. The official cause of death was hypothermia, but the details surrounding their final hours painted a far more chilling picture. Their bodies were discovered by chance, a day later, by a group of hikers from the Moscow Aviation Institute traveling along the same trail. 5 were found near a snow-covered tent, one hand frozen, gripping its edge, a desperate final attempt to cling to life. The hikers alerted authorities, sparking a rescue and recovery mission led by investigator Vladimir Borzenkov and military personnel. Over the next several months, more bodies were recovered in scattered locations, some hundreds of meters from the original campsite. Evidence suggested that in their final hours, the group had tried to escape the relentless weather, splitting up in a bid for survival. Zamanov and Leant were found crawling across frozen terrain, exhausted and defeated, while Alcher appeared to have tried returning to the group before succumbing. The weather that night had been merciless. On January 27th, temperatures plunged to a staggering -28 hectopascals, with winds reaching 50 meters per second. Setting up a tent or finding shelter in such conditions would have been nearly impossible. It seems some stayed near the tent, clinging to what little safety it offered, while others ventured out, hoping against hope to find an escape route. Their bravery met only with the cold, indifferent brutality of the tundra. The tragedy bore a haunting resemblance to the infamous 1959 Dyatlov Pass incident, where skilled hikers also perished under mysterious circumstances in extreme weather. Like that event, the Chiv tragedy was marked by strange group behavior, unanswered questions, and eerie anomalies. Families were denied access to autopsy results, personal belongings, and even a missing camera, while many victims were buried in sealed coffins, deepening the aura of secrecy and fear. Rumors swirled. Some whispered of the undisclosed military activity in the region, others speculated about forces beyond human comprehension. Decades later, in 2019, amateur investigator Viktor Voroshilov, a relative of one of the victims, retraced the group's steps across the frozen plateau. His findings confirmed the deadly weather conditions, blizzards, freezing temperatures, and violent winds, but also revealed unsettling reports of sudden disappearances, unexplained fear, and mysterious deaths among other travelers in the region. Stories emerged of hikers abandoning campsites for no apparent reason, or being found far from their equipment, lost and disoriented. Yet, before Voroshilov could fully unravel the truth, his own life ended tragically in a dispute unrelated to his investigation. His death left the Chiv tragedy unsolved, and its secrets buried beneath decades of snow and silence.
Nepal lies in the Himalayas, dominated by the world's tallest mountain, Mount Everest. The quake sent a mountain of ice and snow directly onto the base camp there, where hundreds had gathered in preparation for the climb to the summit.
On the morning of April 25, 2015, Everest Base Camp buzzed with its usual energy. Tents flapped lightly in the cold air. Climbers rested, laughed, checked their gear, and sent messages home. For many, it was the calm before the push to the summit. The Khumbu icefall still lay ahead, the most dangerous part of the climb. But at base camp, life felt safe. It always does. Then, just before noon, the ground betrayed them. At first, it felt like vertigo. The earth rolled beneath their boots, not in slow waves, but in violent, sickening motion. Cooking pots rattled. Ice walls groaned. Climbers dropped to their knees as the glacier beneath them shifted like water. This wasn't a storm. This wasn't an avalanche. This was an earthquake. 200 kilometers away, Nepal had been struck by a 7.8 magnitude tremor, and Everest felt every second. Moments later, a deep roar rolled up from the western sun, growing impossibly loud. Climbers looked up in time to see it, a massive slab of snow and ice breaking from Pumori's flanks. What followed wasn't a slide. It was a wall of destruction, accelerating straight toward base camp. There was nowhere to run. The avalanche hit with hurricane force, blasting tents across the glacier like paper, burying people in seconds, hurling bodies and equipment into the ice. Some climbers were thrown dozens of meters. Others were crushed where they stood. The air turned white with snow and silence, broken only by screams, alarms, and the frantic sound of bare hands digging through debris. When it ended, base camp was unrecognizable. At least 22 people were dead within hours. By the day's end, the total reached 24, the deadliest single day in Everest's history. Experience meant nothing. Sherpas, expedition leaders, seasoned climbers, and first-timers alike were swept aside. One moment, they were alive, planning dinner or a summit window. The next, they were gone. Above, the nightmare wasn't over. The earthquake had triggered multiple avalanches across the mountain. Ladders in the Khumbu icefall were ripped away. Routes vanished. Camps higher up were cut off completely. More than 100 climbers were stranded above base camp with no safe way down, watching avalanches thunder endlessly through the icefall below. The next morning, helicopters battled thin air and brutal weather, airlifting the wounded in waves. Dozens suffered broken spines, crushed limbs, traumatic brain injuries. Some didn't survive the flight to medical aid. Others were trapped for days, supplies dwindling, while aftershocks continued to rattle the mountain. Survivors later described the scene in haunting terms, like a war zone, like a nuclear blast, total desolation. The most chilling truth, Everest hadn't done anything climbers normally fear. No storm, no misstep, no human error. The danger came from far beyond the mountain, from the earth itself. Nothing could protect them. The 2015 climbing season never recovered. For the first time in 41 years, not a single person reached the summit in the spring. The mountain stood unconquered not because it was impossible, but because it had already claimed enough. It was November night in 1985 when the small Colombian town of Armero slipped into darkness, unaware that death was already racing down the mountain. Nevado del Ruiz, the white-capped giant that had slept for nearly 7 decades, awoke with a roar that shook the heavens. At first, there was only the faint rumble of thunder, muffled by a passing storm. Then, from the volcano's snow-covered summit, fire and ash erupted skyward, followed by something far more terrifying. A river of boiling mud and ice that would soon erase an entire town from existence. The mountain's wrath came in silence. By the time the first lahar, a massive volcanic mud flow descended the slopes, the people of Armero were sleeping or praying, unaware that their fate had already been sealed. The molten material melted the glaciers that crowned Nevado del Ruiz, sending 4 enormous waves of mud and debris hurtling down the valleys at speeds of over 50 kilometers per hour. The lahars picked up rocks, trees, and even houses as they thundered through the darkness. Within minutes, the rivers turned into walls of sludge, devouring everything in their path. In Armero, panic came too late. Power lines went dead, radios went silent, and then a roar like 1,000 freight trains filled the air. The earth began to tremble beneath their feet. People ran into the streets as a black wall approached, swallowing the town whole. Cars were lifted and hurled aside like toys. Homes crumbled and disappeared under 30 feet of mud. Mothers clung to their children, screaming names into the dark, only to be silenced by the weight of the earth itself. By dawn, nearly 23,000 souls had been buried alive. When rescuers finally arrived 12 hours later, they were met with a sight that defied belief. Those who survived were trapped waist-deep in thick, steaming mud, their cries echoing into the mist. Even the rescuers struggled to move. Every step threatened to pull them under. And then came the image that would haunt the world forever. The face of a young girl named Omaira Sanchez. Trapped beneath the wreckage of her home, the 13-year-old was pinned by concrete and debris. For 3 days, she clung to life while rescue workers and reporters gathered around her. Her calm voice, her haunting courage, and her innocent words became a symbol of the tragedy. "I want to go to school," she whispered, her eyes wide and tired. When asked if she was scared, she shook her head. "I just want to rest." Despite desperate efforts, she could not be freed. She died after 60 hours, her body sinking beneath the muddy water that had claimed her home, her family, and her town. But the most painful truth was this: it didn't have to happen. Scientists had warned for weeks that Nevado del Ruiz was about to erupt. Hazard maps were drawn, evacuation plans were proposed, but bureaucracy, politics, and disbelief stood in the way. Local authorities were told to stay calm, to avoid panic. Many residents were assured that they were safe, even as ash rained from the sky. On the night of the eruption, when emergency calls began flooding in, radio communication failed. The storm drowned out the volcano's warning cries, and so thousands stayed inside waiting for the danger to pass. When the sun rose, there was no town left to save. Armero, once home to nearly 29,000 people, had become a mass grave. The few who crawled out alive wandered through miles of sludge and shock, searching for their loved ones. Entire families had vanished without a trace. A banner at a mass funeral read, "The volcano didn't kill 22,000 people. The government killed them." The Armero tragedy became one of the deadliest volcanic disasters in modern history, second only to Mount Pellé's eruption in 1902. It was not just the story of a volcano, but a story of human failure. Neglect, pride, and disbelief had allowed a mountain's whisper to become a nation's scream. In the aftermath, the Colombian government faced public outrage and international scrutiny. The world asked how so many could die when the danger was known in advance. From this anger came change. New systems for volcanic monitoring, new emergency protocols, and the creation of the Volcano Disaster Assistance Program. But for the people of Armero, none of that mattered anymore.
An Australian man has described how he said his goodbyes as best he could to his parents and sister before he left them dead or dying in the crater of Whakaari White Island.
It was supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime adventure, a guided walk through the steaming, alien landscape of New Zealand's Whakaari, also known as White Island. Tourists arrived that morning smiling, snapping photos, their shoes crunching over the yellow sulfur crusts, while the distant hiss of vents filled the air. The volcano was restless, but no one imagined it would erupt. Guides reassured them that White Island had always been active, and that this was part of its charm. Just beneath their feet, though, superheated water and gas were building toward a breaking point. At 2:11 p.m. on December 9, 2019, the mountain exploded. Without a single warning siren, a deafening roar shattered the stillness, and a massive white cloud burst from the crater, rising thousands of feet into the air. Tourists who were standing near the rim were hit first by a wave of boiling gas, ash, and rock, traveling faster than anyone could run. It was a phreatic eruption, one of nature's cruelest surprises, triggered when superheated water trapped underground suddenly turned to steam, bursting through the earth with the power of a bomb. In seconds, the clear blue sky turned black. The ash cloud consumed everything. People screamed for their loved ones, choking as toxic gas filled their lungs. Cameras and phones kept recording as chaos unfolded. Haunting footage later showed tourists running toward the shoreline, their skin peeling and clothes in flames. Boats waiting offshore watched in horror as the eruption swallowed the island, unsure whether to flee or rush in to help. Of the 47 people on the island, 22 never came home. Some died instantly. Others clung to life for days or weeks in hospitals, their bodies burned by ash and boiling mud. Those who survived carried scars that would never fade. Many were cruise ship passengers from Australia and the United States, drawn to the island's raw beauty, unaware that the same force that made it breathtaking could turn deadly without warning. Rescue missions began almost immediately, and they were acts of pure bravery. 3 helicopter pilots, ignoring official orders to stay away, flew through thick ash clouds and toxic air to pull survivors from the smoldering island. They found people burned beyond recognition, some still conscious, whispering for water. They saw bodies scattered near the crater and along the beach, but had to make an impossible choice: save the living and leave the dead behind. Back on the mainland, hospitals filled with victims suffering from burns, covering up to 90% of their bodies. Medical teams worked around the clock, using skin grafts flown in from across the world. Families waited in agony for news, many hearing nothing for days. The scale of the tragedy was almost unimaginable. Couples, parents, and children torn apart in an instant. The eruption didn't just devastate lives, it sparked outrage. Whakaari had been showing signs of unrest for weeks. Scientists had raised its alert level to moderate to heightened volcanic unrest just days before, warning that an eruption was possible. Yet tours continued. Operators assured visitors the island was safe, insisting there was always some level of risk, but that nothing like this had ever happened during a tour. That illusion of safety vanished in an instant. In the months that followed, grief turned to anger. Investigations revealed that both the island's owners and several tour operators had failed to properly protect visitors. Legal battles stretched on for years as survivors and families demanded accountability. WorkSafe New Zealand charged multiple companies and individuals for failing to ensure the safety of workers and tourists. Courtrooms filled with testimony describing how warnings were ignored and how thrill-seeking tourism had come before caution. While the lawsuits dragged on, Whakaari itself remained eerily quiet, a scarred island surrounded by turquoise sea, still steaming, still alive. Tourists are no longer allowed to visit, and the once bustling boat tours are gone. The only sounds now are the waves and the hiss of vents, reminders of the day the volcano claimed 22 lives in a matter of minutes. Even years later, the images still haunt anyone who's seen them. A sky split in two by fire and steam, survivors stumbling toward rescue boats covered in ash, rescuers weeping as they carried the injured. It was a disaster that unfolded in real time, broadcast across the world, a reminder that even in an age of science and technology, nature remains unpredictable and merciless.
I quite literally mean that. There was nearly nothing left. No bodies, no tents, or supplies. Nothing. Unfortunately, Gerard and 5 of the 6 Sherpas that were with him would all be killed, and they would never be seen again.
September 9th, 1974. was supposed to be the moment everything finally clicked. After weeks of waiting out relentless monsoon storms, the French team saw a narrow window of opportunity. The sky had cleared enough to spark hope. Winds had eased. Visibility returned. Camps were stocked. Ropes were in place. For the first time in days, Everest looked almost inviting. The dream felt close, dangerously close. They weren't just aiming for the summit. They were attempting something far bolder. A direct line up the West Ridge, never before climbed. A route designed to bypass the chaos and constant danger of the Khumbu icefall below. A cleaner line, a smarter line, a line that could make history. But Everest had already loaded its gun. Days of heavy rain and thick snowfall had stacked instability across the western face. The mountain absorbed it silently, layering danger on top of danger. Seracs loomed overhead, towering blocks of ice, deceptively still yet ready to fall. Fresh powder clung to ancient ice, fragile and unstable. Every step carried an unspoken question. How long before this all comes down? They knew it was risky. Experienced climbers always do. They just didn't know how little time they had left. That evening, around 7:10 p.m., the mountain made its decision. Without warning, a massive avalanche ripped loose above 7,000 meters. There was no gradual buildup, no second chance. It wasn't a slide, it was an explosive wall of ice and snow, accelerating with unstoppable force. The roar was deafening, like the mountain itself tearing apart. In seconds, Camps Y and 2 were gone. Not damaged, not partially buried, gone. Tents vanished as if they had never existed. Supplies scattered, ropes snapped. Men inside their shelters didn't stand a chance. No time to unzip a tent, grab boots, or run. The avalanche swept bodies and gear into crevasses beneath tons of moving snow. Among the victims was Gérard Devoiseux, the expedition leader and one of Chamonix's most respected guides. Known for his calm judgment and technical skill, he was the kind of man climbers trusted with their lives. Alongside him were Sherpas Pemba Dorje, Nawang Lutuk, Lakpa, and Sanu Wangal. Down at Camp Wand, Nima Wangchu was also buried. 6 lives ended almost instantly. By the time the mountain fell silent again, Everest's death toll had climbed to 36. Above the devastation, Claude Anstey survived, alone at Camp de Thru. At first, he didn't understand what had happened. The radio was silent. The lights below were gone. The camps that should have been there simply weren't. At base camp, distant thunder rolled through the valley, echoing unnaturally long against the cliffs. Climbers realized something was wrong before broken voices on the radio confirmed the horror. No rescue was possible. Night had fallen. The slopes remained unstable. Any attempt to reach the debris would have been suicidal. Only one body was ever recovered. The rest remained somewhere inside Everest, entombed in ice, folded into crevasses, slowly becoming part of the mountain itself. The expedition ended the next morning. No summit push, no heroic final effort, just stunned climbers dismantling the remnants of their camp beneath a mountain that had spoken loud and clear. The West Ridge Direct, a route imagined as a safer, more elegant alternative to the deadly Khumbu icefall, revealed itself as a different kind of killer. Quieter, less traveled, just as merciless. What lingers isn't just the avalanche, it's the timing, the optimism, the belief that a brief break in the storm meant the danger had passed. Everest didn't need recklessness that day. It didn't need a mistake. It only needed patience. And when the mountain finally moved, it delivered a brutal lesson. On Everest, ambition counts for nothing when gravity calls the shots.
That's right, Steve. Just a tragic turn of events up north on what would have been Emily's 20th birthday. Fish and Game officials say Emily's body was found just after 11 a.m. today.
It was November 20th, 2022, when 19-year-old Emily Sattel set out on what was meant to be the final, triumphant hike of an ambitious quest. A college sophomore from Westford, Massachusetts, Emily had already climbed 40 of New Hampshire's 48 peaks over 4,000 feet, and now, with her 20th birthday just days away, she aimed to complete the journey alone. That morning, her mother, Olivera, dropped her off at the Lafayette Place campground trailhead at 4:30 a.m. Emily wore light pants, a jacket, and trail running shoes, carrying only a small backpack with granola bars, a banana, water, and heated gloves. What she didn't carry, essentials for winter hiking like a map, compass, or proper insulated clothing, would prove fatal. Emily began her hike along the Franconia Ridge, planning to summit Mount Lafayette, Mount Lincoln, and Flume. At first, the ascent went smoothly, but by 11 a.m., light snow began falling. Oliveira sent a quick text to check on her daughter, but there was no reply. The weather, invisible to Emily's preparations, quickly turned merciless. Temperatures plunged below zero. Winds reached 40 to 60 mph with gusts up to 95 mph, and the wind chill made it feel like 30 degrees. Trails that had once been familiar now vanished beneath layers of snow, each step an uncertain struggle against the storm. By noon, when Emily failed to return, her family reported her missing. Rescue efforts were launched immediately, but the mountain refused to give her up easily. Poor visibility, deep snow, and relentless wind slowed the search. Helicopters, scent dogs, and more than 60 ground searchers scoured the peaks, but the mountain remained unforgiving. On Tuesday, some of Emily's belongings and footprints were discovered near the headwaters of Lafayette Brook, offering hope. But progress stalled as night fell, and freezing conditions made the search too dangerous to continue. Finally, on Wednesday, November 23rd, around 11:15 a.m., Emily's body was found on the northwest side of Mount Lafayette, about 3/4 of a mile from the trail. Investigators believe she became disoriented in the worsening storm, losing her way as she struggled to find the trail. The extreme cold had claimed her. Recovering her body was itself a battle, requiring a New Hampshire Army National Guard helicopter to navigate the treacherous conditions. Emily's parents, Oliveira and Jorge, were devastated. Jorge, a gastroenterologist, had clung to hope during the search, while Oliveira, a psychiatrist, had feared the worst from the beginning. Reflecting later, she admitted that her medical knowledge had shown her the dire reality, even as she tried to remain calm for others. Emily had been a remarkable young woman, excelling in biochemistry and chemical biology at Vanderbilt University, volunteering at a Navajo reservation school, tackling drug abuse on campus, and pursuing a future as a doctor. Driven, kind-hearted, and brilliant, her loss left a gaping void. At her funeral, Oliveira called her a shooting star, so bright, so brilliant, yet gone far too soon. Emily's death sparked urgent conversations about hiking safety in New Hampshire's White Mountains, notorious for unpredictable weather. Officials emphasized preparation, carrying essential gear, checking mountain-specific forecasts, dressing for the worst, and never underestimating the wilderness. Her parents are now considering starting a nonprofit in her memory, hoping to raise awareness and educate hikers so that no one else would face the same tragedy.
Flipping this morning, we're now learning that Trails Carolina will not face an involuntary manslaughter charge. It comes after a 12-year-old boy died back in February.
It was February 2nd, 2024, when 12-year-old Clark Harmon arrived in the cold, mountainous expanse of Transylvania County, North Carolina. He had traveled all the way from New York, escorted by hired guardians, to attend Trails Carolina, a wilderness therapy camp his parents believed could help him manage his ADHD and anxiety. They imagined a place where Clark could grow, find calm, and gain the tools to navigate life. Instead, it became the place where his life would end. At first, Clark was understandably upset, clinging to the uncertainty of a strange environment. He eventually complied with instructions, though he chose not to eat dinner that evening, a small act that would become a haunting detail in the story of his last night. He was assigned to Cabin 6, joining 4 other young campers under the care of 4 staff members. What was supposed to be a routine night of settling in became anything but. Clark was placed in a bivy bag, a weather-resistant sleeping device often used by hikers, but repurposed here as a containment tool for campers deemed at risk of running away or having outbursts. These bags were equipped with alarms to alert staff if someone tried to leave, but the bivy bag assigned to Clark was damaged. Its ventilation mesh was torn. Instead of properly repairing it, staff simply sealed the outer layer, creating a coffin-like enclosure with dangerously limited airflow. That night, Clark was restless. Staff noticed him mumbling and moving within the bag. They briefly removed him, allowing him a few moments of fresh air outside, but after he fell asleep, he was returned to the bag, resealed, alarm blaring. The staff conducted routine checks through the night, but the opaque material prevented any real assessment. They saw movement but could not see the truth inside. In the early hours of February 3rd, Clark stopped moving. The lack of airflow in the sealed bivy bag had suffocated him, silently and unnoticed. It wasn't until the next morning, around 8 a.m., that staff discovered his lifeless body. Cold and rigid, his knees bent unnaturally, arms crossed over his chest, skin discolored, broth at his mouth, a grim testament to the struggle his young body had endured. His pants and underwear were found near his shoulder, yet he still wore his hoodie and t-shirt. Emergency responders estimated he had been dead for hours. The Transylvania County Sheriff's Department immediately launched an investigation. An autopsy confirmed the horrifying truth. Clark had died from restricted airflow, and his death was ruled a homicide. But Trails Carolina staff resisted full cooperation. They refused to provide access to the other campers or share their identities. Investigators uncovered a pattern of negligence. Warnings about bivy bags, common knowledge online, had been ignored, safety measures overlooked, and a young life lost as a result. This was not the first time tragedy had struck the camp. In 2014, 17-year-old Alec Lansing died after attempting to leave during a hike, his body found 2 weeks later at the bottom of a gorge. The camp was fined $112,000 but continued to operate. Former campers have spoken out, recalling the suffocating use of bivy bags and burrito wraps, which tightly restrained children in tarps or sleeping gear. One camper described feeling trapped, unable to breathe, like being cocooned in terror. Others, hearing of Clark's death, feared they had escaped only by chance. After Clark's death, the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services intervened. All campers were removed, and the camp's license was revoked. A petition demanding permanent closure gained thousands of signatures. Trails Carolina, however, claimed no wrongdoing, offering a vague expression of sadness and promising cooperation, while the lack of transparency told a far darker story. The frigid winds howled like restless ghosts through the jagged peaks of Mount Everest, rattling ice and snow as if the mountain itself were alive. Ngimi Tenji Sherpa stood on the icy slopes of the Khumbu Icefall, his pack pressing heavily against his back, yet his face, weathered, strong, unreadable, betrayed no hint of strain. To anyone watching, he seemed untouchable, a man forged in the crucible of the Himalayas. He had done this before. At 38, Ngimi was no ordinary climber. A veteran Sherpa, he had summited Everest multiple times, guiding others safely to the top while risking his own life with every step. He knew the mountain's moods, its subtle warnings, its hidden dangers. The Himalayas were his home, their vast, frozen expanse as familiar to him as the streets of his village. He understood the icefall's deadly beauty, the treacherous dance of shifting seracs and yawning crevasses. And yet, Everest does not care how many times you have bested it. It was April 14th, 2022. Another expedition, another climb. Ngimi's mission was routine: carry supplies to Camp 2. Alongside a dozen fellow Sherpas from International Mountain Guides, IMG, he moved through the deadly Khumbu Icefall with the practiced precision of someone who had been here countless times before. Ahead lay the football field, a relatively stable stretch at 1710 to 1999 feet. Compared to the chaotic maze of ice towers and gaping crevasses elsewhere, it was a fleeting moment of reprieve, a chance to catch one's breath before entering the more unpredictable terrain beyond. But Everest gives no reprieves. Somewhere along the ascent, it struck. A sudden wave of nausea crashed over him. His chest tightened. Breaths that had once been steady now came shallow and ragged. Panic crept in like an uninvited guest. Something was very, very wrong. Ngimi pressed forward, forcing his legs to obey. He had carried heavier loads, faced harsher conditions, survived storms and near misses, but now his vision blurred. His legs wobbled beneath him. The pack that once felt routine now pressed against him like a weight too heavy to bear. His body was failing. Desperate, Ngimi stopped. He scanned the ice field for his fellow climbers, but the vast expanse was empty. He was alone. The nausea intensified. His breathing became erratic. The world spun around him. Every attempt to push forward was met with collapse. His only choice now was to wait. He sank to the ice, still strapped into his pack, hoping that a few moments of rest would restore his strength. They did not. The cold crept into his bones. His vision dimmed to a gray haze, fingers numbed to uselessness. The wind roared, drowning out all sound except the faint, distant rhythm of his failing heart. He sat in silence, swallowed by the vastness around him, while the mountain remained indifferent, towering and eternal. When rescuers reached him at 4 a.m., he was still upright, backpack secured to his body as if he had simply chosen to rest. His face was peaceful, almost serene, as though he had drifted quietly into sleep. Everest had claimed another. No falls, no avalanches, no trauma. Only the silent, invisible killer that takes the best prepared, most experienced climbers. High-altitude sickness. The irony was cruel. A Sherpa, a guardian of the mountain, taken by the very force he had spent his life mastering. A third of all Everest deaths belong to Nepali guides and porters, the unsung heroes who carry the weight of other people's dreams, often at the cost of their own lives. Their courage is unmatched. Their sacrifice is largely invisible, yet their names rarely make headlines. Ngimi Tenji Sherpa was now among them. His life, like the lives of so many others, was a reminder of both human bravery and human fragility. His story is more than a statistic. It is a warning, a meditation on mortality, and a tribute to those who dedicate their lives to the mountain. Everest is not a prize to be conquered. It is a force to be survived, one that gives no quarter, shows no mercy, and spares no one, regardless of skill, experience, or devotion. And for every climber who dreams of standing atop its summit, Ngimi's fate whispers a caution. The mountain will always demand respect, and sometimes even that is not enough.